Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to the stream to end all streams. The debate just concluded. I've not done videos or much of anything really for the past week. Had a health issue to attend to. That's all good. So now I'm back on the swing of things. And I, like I'm sure many of you, sat through 3 hours of mystery and wonder tonight and thought I would share with you some reactions, right? That's why we're here, isn't it? So, if you had a moment that stands out, or if there's something that you think was the top line takeaway, let me know in the comments. To me, I thought the most incredible exchange was the segment where Tulsi addressed it wasn't even really much of an exchange. Well, she had an exchange with Pete actually, but the most significant part of it was her beginning statement when she lashed, to put it mildly, into CNN and the New York Times, who are the co-hosts of the debate, and essentially described them as despicable. Now, I knew the campaign was aware of the statements that had been made on CNN within the past 24, 48 hours by Bakari Sellers, who stated unequivocally with no reservation that Tulsi is a Russian asset. Of course, nobody on the panel that Bakari Sellers was on had the wherewithal or interest to challenge him on that absurdly astounding claim. But so it was just, they just let it kind of stand. And therefore, millions of people, or however many people happen to be watching CNN at that time, probably not that many, but however many were watching, got to see that insanely incendiary claim leveled without anything much in the way of a retort. And then, as Tulsi said, just a couple days earlier, the New York Times put out this unbelievably duplicitous and lazy and just bottom of the barrel scummy article on Tulsi, which was essentially just an encapsulation of every smear that's been used against her into one. So it was just like a rattling of talking points structured in a way that made it seem as though Tulsi has some nefarious, sinister, underhanded agenda. The headline was, "What is Tulsi Gabbard up to?" Like, she doesn't say what she's up to pretty frequently. I mean, she has positions and she espouses them, and she asks people to support her candidacy on the basis of those positions. It's not that much of a mystery as to why she's doing what she's doing, notwithstanding the interminable desire on the part of her antagonist to discern some kind of latent agenda that she's not being forthright about. Now, maybe she has some kind of latent agenda that I'm not aware of, but I follow these things pretty closely, and I'm familiar with the campaign, let's say, and it's I just don't see it. And notice that Tulsi didn't even comply with the requests to comment on that article, and rightly so. She did comply with a New York Times profile that was released in August, you might remember, which basically presented the theme of Tulsi Gabbard thinks we're all doomed, which rehearsed some of the same talking points, but a little bit more of a traditional profile format. And the New York Times did acquire the campaign's assent to participate in that profile. And what did they get for it? A pretty disgusting smear piece that was, fun fact, written by the partner of Barry Weiss. So the romantic partner Barry Weiss was the person who was dispatched by the New York Times to write that particular profile. Interesting. And so the New York, Tulsi's campaign saw what was coming, and they didn't go along with this latest profile. And it was truly, I mean, I've seen it all with regard to negative press coverage of her, and I'm not even against negative coverage on principle if it's rational, if it has at least a modicum of fairness, if it brings light to important issues, etc. But this is just garbage to almost a comical degree. So that was the context of Tulsi using her response on Syria to kind of segue and connect to a criticism of the media. Because as she rightly pointed out, it's not just Trump who screwed up this latest situation in Syria. I think that the hostility to Trump's withdrawal of U.S. forces from northeast Syria is extremely overwrought, and it seems as though Erdogan was intent on initiating this invasion at some point, regardless of what Trump did or didn't do. So that seems rather inevitable. And this idea that the U.S. is going to forcibly prevent that invasion means that it would be basically party to a war, a new kind of front in the war. And so I don't see I think the idea that Trump invited the slaughter of Kurds is a little much, right? But nonetheless, I would allow that the manner in which Trump went about it probably was wrongheaded in a way, given that it was announced via tweet randomly, didn't give anybody time to prepare. Maybe it could have been done in a way that was a little more judicious and therefore minimized the harm that the Kurds would incur. So I'll grant that. But the way that Tulsi framed her response by bringing up the larger issue, which was that the political and media class on a bipartisan basis, up to and including Trump, but not exclusively Trump, are all deeply implicated in the Syria debacle, with the latest week being just the most recent manifestation of that debacle. Now we find out that some of the proxy forces that are aligned with Turkey and are attacking Kurds are some of the very same forces that the U.S. had previously for years been describing as moderate rebels or freedom fighters or whatever kind of cliched, valorized term. Now, U.S. officials are running around saying, oh, these people are horrible and they're bandits and they're wicked and everything else. Okay, what happened? Maybe arming them and fueling the conflict by proxy for all these years was not the greatest idea. Did anybody ever consider that? And so for Tulsi to kind of twist the question around and use it to indict not just Trump, she does indict Trump harshly, but yeah, everybody involved in this decision-making paradigm, which led to the situation, drew her ire. And that was, I thought, a perfect way to approach the question. And then she had to contend with Mayor Pete, who I thought was sort of unappealingly aggressive all night. I don't think being aggressive is necessarily bad, especially in the context of the debate, but he just came across as sort of like he was simultaneously both kind of like angry and confrontational, but also wimpy, like and a little bit whiny, right? And so he jumped in and rejected the entire premise of Tulsi's assessment and said, oh, no, it's all about Trump betraying our allies, blah, 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 blah. And I saw one of the CNN, no-name commentators who has never had an original thought in her life, I would assume, said that Pete was just great during that exchange. So that was definitely the highlight for her. There was a point where Tulsi tried to. Well, there were 2 points at which Tulsi attempted to draw in Warren on the subject of regime change in Syria. The first, Warren didn't quite respond to. I mean, she said generically that she doesn't want endless wars and wants to get out of the Middle East, but almost everybody's saying that at this point, including Trump. Trump says he wants to stop endless wars and get out of the Middle East, while on the other hand, he sends thousands of more additional troops to Saudi Arabia, which happens to be in the Middle East. Check a map. And he continues to ratchet up tensions with Iran, which would potentially cause an even bigger deployment to the Middle East. And he intensified U.S. support for the Yemen war, et cetera, et cetera. So it's one thing to say superficially that you want to stop endless wars and you want to get out of the Middle East, but what Tulsi does is that, which is unique, is that she sort of makes people reckon with the true implications of that rhetoric, especially vis-a-vis Syria, which was the obviously big topic tonight. And there's another exchange where she again tried to challenge Warren, not in an overly confrontational way, I thought, but in a sound, kind of rational way, to explain why, for all her plans, she is best equipped to be the commander-in-chief, to preside over the foreign affairs portfolio of the most powerful military in world history. Sounds like something that Warren should probably be probed on at some point. And conveniently, CNN cut immediately to a commercial break. So Warren was spared from that exchange, which may not have ended particularly well for her, although, Warren is obviously very competent, and I'm sure she could have handled it reasonably well. But it would have been nice to see how that transpired had the exigencies of corporate capitalism not got in the way. And that was a stark reminder of how stupid it is that these TV networks and their friends in the newspaper industry have such monopolistic control over debates, because like that, they can just say, oh, time for a commercial, time to sell you some prescription drugs that you probably don't need. Ask your doctor about blah, 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 restless leg syndrome. So that's what we needed to hear, rather than Warren's response to Tulsi's challenge. And, what are you going to do? Overall, Tulsi had the second to least amount of speaking time, 8 minutes, 24 seconds, ahead only of Tom Steyer, my good friend, at 7 minutes and 13 seconds. So Steyer spent, I don't know how many hundreds of millions of dollars farming every available avenue for data, for voter files, etc. And his big payoff on the debate stage was 7 minutes and 13 seconds of speaking time. Although he has already qualified for the November debate, so we have that to look forward to. Now, Warren had by far the most speaking time. I don't begrudge the moderators necessarily for focusing somewhat on Warren. I mean, she's definitely on the most promising trajectory poll-wise of any candidate. But she had 23 minutes total, and the next candidate, Biden, had 16 minutes. So that's a lot more time than her nearest competitor. Now, a lot of that had to do with the fact that every other candidate was challenging her, which of course would prompt her to respond. So maybe it's not entirely the moderator's fault. But there was a point at which the debate almost seemed like it was a Q&A session for Warren and the other candidates. Like I tweeted, we should just have an Elizabeth Warren town hall where all the other candidates are just like audience members and they can take turns asking her sort of ridiculous and limp questions. like Mayor Pete's kind of squirrely questions to her I thought were a little tedious, although it's true that she didn't really answer one of them, which is that, are you going to raise taxes? Are you going to pay for this? And then Bernie said, yes, I'm going to raise taxes, etc., to fund Medicare for all. And Warren skirts around that rather, I don't know that I would say artfully. I think some might find it artful, but her lack of firm commitment on that issue is pretty conspicuous at this point. And everybody's noticing it. At least Bernie has the principle just to tell everybody, yeah, this is going to require you to pay more in taxes, but it's still a desirable policy for XYZ reasons. That's a little more straightforward, I think. In terms of Bernie, I mean, the one issue obviously I was looking for was to see whether his health would seem to be impacted from the heart attack, and I think excuse me. I think if you didn't know that he had a heart attack, you would have no idea based on his just overall performance, except for the fact that Aaron Burnett brought up the fact that he had a heart attack at one point at the end, near the end. So that alone is a big boost to Bernie because it suggested that there was no at least discernible effect from the health episode on his ability to debate. So that's a positive thing for him. I still think that the heart attack is factoring into voters' assessments in a way that isn't the greatest for him, but it's a long campaign. First vote's not cast till February, and I'm sticking by my proclamation that I first made in November of last year. And then again in February of this year, when he first announced, I still believe he is the front runner and that he's the most formidable candidate. It's a tough one. I can see the betting markets like anybody else, but I'm sticking by that because that was my reading of the situation early on. And the heart attack really made me sort of second guess that somewhat, but if his performance continues to improve or at least remain stable, I'm going to go with that prediction still. Or at least I'm going to stand by the arguments that I made in both of those pieces. So let's see. I'm just going to scroll through some of my notes here. Oh, yeah, that final question. Oh, my God. If you made it through 3 hours and you're like, okay, the end of I can finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. And then Anderson Cooper drops this giant whopper on the debate stage, which I would hope, caused the entire viewing audience, including to me, to let out an enormous and protracted groan. The question was, who is a friend you have who would be most surprising based on the Ellen George Bush episode, which I thankfully sit out of when that happened because I was dealing with other stuff on a personal level. So I didn't really engage in that news cycle. But there could not have been a lamer closing question, but you can never put it past Anderson Cooper to come up with something that's extraordinarily lame. And I think like at least 3 or 4 of them use the opportunity to say how much they love John McCain. Now, it's true that Bernie did work with John McCain on veterans bills, and Biden worked with him extensively, Klobuchar traveled with him, etc. But the question was, who is your most surprising friend? Was anybody surprised by the fact that these Democrats hold John McCain in high regard? No, it's like the least surprising thing ever. That's the first person you would expect them to cite if the idea is like, who's somebody you can work with across the aisle in a bipartisan way, blah, blah, blah. So that was just so stupid. Tulsi cited Trey Gowdy, who I didn't actually know that she was on good terms with. It doesn't surprise me. I figured she'd cite some Republican. One who I know that she's talked about a lot in the past that she had a good relationship with was Walter Jones, who died in February. Who's the longtime congressman from North Carolina. I thought she might go with him, but she went with Trey Gowdy. I'd be sort of curious to know what they talk about and what personal challenges Gowdy assisted with Tulsi at some point, apparently. Kind of interesting. I think Gowdy's obviously a smart guy, but he's a little bit of a creep. So I actually think that was a good answer for her from her in terms of surprise. Let's see here. What else? Oh yeah, so Cory Booker mentioned he didn't mention him by name, but he sort of alluded to Chris Christie, and I just went back in my mind of all the ridiculous photos that you can find on Google of Christie and Booker. I, as a native New Jerseyan, I covered both Christie and Booker when they were in the formative stages of their bromance in the late 2000s. And there's a lot of stories that can be told about that, which I still have to do at some point. I haven't really gotten around to doing my Booker piece yet, but I will do that at some point. One of the other great exchanges I thought was when Biden was going on about how he got things done in a bipartisan way. That's his vision of change, etc. And Bernie was like, yeah, but the things you got done included a preferred trade agreement with China and the Iraq War and bankruptcy bill, and those aren't the greatest things. May have gotten them done, but having gotten them done is no endorsement of those things. Maybe your vision of change is self-flawed if those are the things that you were able to get done. And that was the moment where Bernie proved that his heart attack was no impediment for him to shred Biden, which he did. I still wish that Bernie, when he brings up the Iraq War against Biden, would go a little deeper than just the fact that Biden voted for it. He didn't just vote for it. He helped enable it in a variety of ways. He chastised opponents of it. And up until today, 2019, he's just, I think bringing up the 2002 vote for the 8 millionth time maybe has a little bit of a diminishing returns, but nonetheless, it was a good exchange on Bernie's part. Weird moment. I'm going through actually my tweets now and just sort of recalling things. Weird moment was when the section about court packing, and some of the candidates were sort of open to it, in favor of it, some opposed. And Warren gave the most blatantly non-committal answer of all when she said, quote, "We may have to talk about, quote, unquote, packing the Supreme Court." And she's like, okay, I understand if like legal theory and the legal system and that kind of thing is not your wheelhouse, but Elizabeth Warren has been a law professor for decades, including at Harvard. And I would think that she had given the notion of court packing perhaps some thought at some point, at least enough to have an answer that goes beyond, we may have to talk about it, which is a little odd and evasive. One of the most humiliating moments was when Kamala chose to so like everybody had a turn confronting Warren, right? And when it was finally Kamala's turn, the one thing that she chose to confront her on was not any issue under the sun that you could think of. It was why Warren won't join Kamala's call to demand that Twitter expel Trump from the platform. So Kamala thinks that her big new winning issue is to say that the tech companies, Twitter in particular, should be enlisted to do the bidding of the Democrats and rid the platform of the elected president, basically depriving him of his primary communications mechanism. Great idea. Can't imagine that there'd be any backlash to that. So when it came time finally for Warren for Kamala to take something up with Warren, she chose to demand that she join her Twitter campaign, which was just very, very sad. Biden had a lot of weird lines, which is just like totally expected at this point, where he said, that you can play the stock market by clipping coupons. Like you can buy and sell stocks by clipping coupons. I don't know how that logistically works. But if it's possible to clip coupons and buy and sell stocks, somebody let me know how actually that works, because I'd like to do it. I never knew that was possible. Maybe in order to do that, you have to like put them on your record player and bring them into like a disadvantaged community and play them for children, and maybe that gives you insight into how to trade stocks in this way that Biden suggests. One of Booker's annoying habits is to like chastise everybody for debating. Like how he kind of says it's bad that anybody should want to debate because it's like damaging to Democrats and helps Trump. And it's just like, what are you supposed to do with 12 people on stage and like 20 people total still running for the nomination, if not debate? Like, how do you think candidates are supposed to draw out their distinctions amongst one another if you don't debate, and at times heatedly debate? There's no evidence that having a heated debate would necessarily help Trump. Hillary and Obama were brutal to one another in 2008, and Obama still won the general election handily. Trump and the Republicans were brutal to one another in the primary in 2016, and Trump still won the election. So it's sort of like it's just a myth that a contentious primary is somehow damaging to the ultimate nominee. I mean, you could argue that it has some effect potentially, but it's very vague in terms of what the precise implications of that are. And so I don't think that really holds up. It's just a way for Booker to sort of posture as this uniting candidate who wants all the Democrats to get along, and sort of it's an appeal to the type of voter who doesn't want to see any infighting and wants to like back the candidate who is the least inclined to like get into the fray. Biden at one point said that withdrawing troops from northeastern Syria, and again, I think it's the opposition to Trump's withdrawal is overwrought, but I'll grant that there were some procedural problems with how he did it. But that said, Biden's statement that the troop withdrawal was the most shameful thing that any U.S. president has ever done in history. I mean, I could give you about 50 things that were done in like 1-2 month period in, I don't know, 2005 that were all orders of magnitude more shameful than this Trump withdrawal. It's funny how withdrawing troops is regarded as shameful, but dropping bombs and occupying foreign land in perpetuity is not particularly shameful, at least in the eyes of Biden. Yeah, so there was one moment that I thought the internet would enjoy when Tulsi says she agreed with Yang. There's a certain type of internet denizen who surely got a major thrill out of that. There was one point where I felt that after Bernie was asked the question of whether he thought billionaires should exist, the opportunity was right for Bernie to simply turn to Tom Steyer and say, "You, Tom, personally, you should not exist." But he didn't do it, although it would have been funny. Some of the foreign policy sections of this debate were just demented. Like there were major sections of the debate that were devoted entirely to Russia. And it's interesting because none of the prior 3 debates had really focused that much on Russia. Every now and then somebody would throw in a line, right? But now that we're in this Ukraine gate impeachment fervor, Russia's back at top of mind because of its like obvious narrative continuity between Russiagate and Mueller and Ukraine gate and this impeachment episode. And some of the rhetoric around Russia is just crazy. Beto O'Rourke saying that Russia invaded the United States. Just like I know what he means, obviously, with he means election interference, but using the terminology that Russia invaded the United States gives the impression of a fleet of Russian like aircraft carriers coming ashore on like Virginia or something and launching an actual military invasion, which obviously is not close to ever happening. But that's the terminology that they invoke to ratchet up the fear. And there's one point where Amy Klobuchar was like, she actually sounded like she was on the verge of tears when she was screaming about Russia. I mean, I have to go back and watch that foreign policy section in more detail because it was truly incredibly deranged. So that's about it. If anybody has any interesting super chats or anything else to note, I'll stick around. I'm going to write a piece about this for tomorrow. I thought I was going to write it for tonight, but I find myself transitioning into sleep mode. So I'm going to wait to do that for the morning. The super chat the chat seems to be infected by spammers and trolls at the moment. I don't know why, so I apologize for that. Although I don't know why I'm apologizing. I didn't do it. But if that's inhibiting me from seeing your comments or super chats, I don't know. The trolls have won. It's Russia. Gotta be. Somebody says he's been going back and reading some of your older pieces. Good stuff. Thank you. Written for many publications over the years. So it's always I occasionally do that myself. If there's like an issue that comes up that I had commented on in the past, I'll go back and see if my statements hold up. I feel like most of the time they generally do, but maybe not always. All right, people. I'm going to are you on live chat or chop chat? How do I change to top chat? So you can have a top chat is filtered. How do I change? I should have known this. How do I change to the top chat function where it just filters only the super chats? I didn't even know you could do that. I'll figure out how to do that at some point. Next time. All right, people. Past midnight here. I'm going to leave it there for now. Have a wonderful night.